on the rebellion of Korach. I didn't teach it from the perspective of the rebels. I taught it from Moshe's perspective, that it really wasn't about rebellion. It was about a test of leadership and how that Moshe was going to respond to this test to his leadership. And that's the angle we took last time. But this time, I do want to look at it from the standpoint of the rebellion and what actually occurred, what took place, what caused this thing to all blow up at this particular time. I mean, it all stemmed from a disagreement about how you interpret the Torah, right? Korach and his people say, we're all holy. He lives among all of us. But Moshe is saying, yes, but he's given a special role to the Kohanim and to the Levites. And it's not that you're not equal in the eyes of Adonai, it's that you have different roles. But there again, we've got the rebels saying, no, that's not it. That's not the way you interpret that passage. So really, they're just like everyone else. They fight over doctrine and how you're going to act out, and how you're going to walk out those doctrines. And so as I was preparing, what I realized is I had actually come up with this message several months ago. And when I realized what was happening on the internet at that time, it was pretty hot, I put it away. Because I didn't want to seem to be drawn into the online wars. And those of you who use the internet know what I'm talking about. Sometimes people get really angry with one another and they use the internet to vent that anger and accusation and so forth. And when I saw how it had blown up, I just pulled this out and said, now it's not the time. It's just something that I think it would add more fuel to the fire than to help put it out. So the title of the message today is TV Christians and .com Messianics. What did Adonai mean when he gave a commandment? What did he mean? The whole congregation is holy. How did he intend for that commandment and that understanding to be acted out? No, Steely, we won't play the whole thing after the service. What we had here was a failure to communicate. Korach and his people are interpreting it one way. Moshe and Aharon and the people that follow them are interpreting it another way. And there's a conflict on how we're going to take this scripture and act upon it. There's no communication occurring. And we can see that in Numbers 16:12. It says, and Moshe sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, but they said, we will not come up. Is it a small thing that you have brought us up out of a land flowing with milk and honey to kill us in the wilderness, that you should keep acting like a prince over us? Moreover, you have not brought us into a land flowing with milk and honey, nor given us inheritance of fields and vineyards. Will you put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. No way. We're not going to come talk to you. And he's asking a question that's really strange. He says, will you gouge out or will you put out the eyes of these men? And you think, what does that mean? What does this have to do with gouging out someone's eyes or putting out their eyes? I believe this is a challenge to Moshe. They're saying, we're the ones seeing this correctly. We are the ones with the correct interpretation of these events and these words. But your interpretation is incorrect. And what you intend to do is call us to this meeting and tell us we're not seeing it right. You're going to tell us we don't see what we know we see. We know it's true. We know our interpretation is correct. There's only one way to look at this, and you're trying to call us up and change our minds and tell us what we see is not real. Well, that's exactly what Moshe intended to do. It's kind of ironic because what they are seeing is not a faith. It's a faithlessness. There is not obedience mixed with their ungrateful minds. When we're ungrateful, You see how the ungratefulness was mixed into the words? They're saying, you took us out of a land flowing with milk and honey. You did not bring us into a land. You brought us out. You brought us to a place of death. And you know what? When you don't have faith, when you're in disobedience, it is a place of death. They couldn't connect their own behavior with the bad things that were happening to them. They didn't see that the promise being beyond their reach was a direct result of their own behavior, not of Moshe or Aharon falling short. What they were really doing was challenging Adonai. That's who they were challenging. They had become nearsighted. Their vision was blurred. The understanding of their minds was darkened. But they still think they're seeing what they ought to see. They still think they see it correctly. They don't. They've begun to see deliverance as a curse, and slavery is a land flowing with milk and honey. We do the same thing. We deceive ourselves. The heart is deceitful above all things. It's desperately sick, and who can know it? Who knows the lies we are telling ourselves, and we don't even know it? We don't know. And the more discontented they became, the harder it became for them to see eye to eye with Moshe and Aharon. The farther apart they became on how they could interpret scriptures and how they could interpret certain events. In fact, they began to see completely different interpretations of words and events. That's how they grew apart. How could they be so far apart? Because they heard the same words and they had the same experiences. They went through exactly the same thing. But you have Moshe and Aharon interpreting it this way, and Korach and his rebels interpreting it that way, seeing it totally differently. And we know, because we read it in hindsight, we have that benefit, we have that advantage that this was given to us to teach us. Our advantage is that we understand that what Moshe received from Adonai and what he passed on to them was one thing. The way that they took it, understood it, and acted on it was completely another thing than what was intended from heaven. Heaven intended for them to take that message differently than they took it. We know that in hindsight. But when you start filtering a message through resentment, through anger, through pride, through ungratefulness, it does sound totally different. And you do begin to see things in a much different way than other people. And when Moshe realizes, Moshe's human. When they challenge him, they directly challenge his authority, he gets angry just like that. We'll have a duel. We'll just go before God and have a duel. And we'll see how many of you are left standing. But then if you keep reading down into verse 8, you can see that he takes some time. He lets that anger kind of, filter out. He starts to get some balance back about him. And we can see that he reconsiders the challenge. And he sends a messenger to call these men to him. Let's sit down. Let's sit down and talk about this before we cross a line that we can't come back over. Because once you go before the Lord unworthily, we know the consequence. We've already seen Aharon's sons were killed before the Lord because they crossed a line. Fellas, come on, let's sit down. Let's talk about this before we cross a line. And it's not going to be something that we can undo. It would be too late. But by this time, you notice that they refuse to communicate with Moshe except by intermediaries. They start sending messenger boys back and forth. And that's really dangerous. Because if you're going to send a messenger to deliver an important message...
What we've got here is failure to communicate. Some men, you just can't read.
Sometimes you just can't reach them with a messenger, right? Because when Paul sent a messenger or any of the other apostles, they would usually say, but I will come to you. I'm sending you this letter. And I'm sending it with a trusted person, and I believe they know my heart well enough to explain this letter to you the way that it was intended. But I will come to you when the Holy Spirit lets me. Right now I'm prevented, but I will come to you, and I will tell you my heart. I will explain this message to you more thoroughly. I will not let you go until you completely understand it. Moshe was trying to communicate, But at this point, they've shut down. They only want messengers. And the messengers are not helping. They do not help the situation. If we're talking about intermediaries, messengers, web postings, emails, all the little tools that we use to try to send a message, they are insufficient for communication. They cannot help you resolve a problem. They can only help you to send information back and forth. But remember, once that person receives the message that did not come straight from your mouth looking at your eyeballs, they are going to filter it the same way that Korach did. It's through their own emotional state of mind when they receive the message that they are going to interpret it. They will even put a tone of voice on you that maybe you would not have spoken that message in. Just like, remember, yeah, sure. Or did they receive it? Yeah, sure. It's their state of mind when they receive the message that that's going to be filtered through. And that's why emails, web postings, little messengers running back and forth are not adequate for communication. There's no substitute for face-to-face communication. Often, when you receive those types of real short messages, and they're not intended to be communication, they're intended to be information. Here's the information you need. But what you have to remember is that a lot of times you will take that message in, filtered through, number one, your emotional state, and number two, what you think that person's motive was. And we see that Korach is accusing Moshe of being greedy. He's saying, you're just acting like this so you can get all the sacrifices. And you and your little cohorts there, they get all the good stuff. They get the tithes, they get to do the fun stuff. They get to go places we don't get to go. Shame on you, you greedy thing. You just want all the power and the money. And Moshe's going, no, this is just the way that God told me to do it. I'm just passing the message along. They didn't like the message. And if you look at Moshe and Shmuel in our readings today, they both had to offer proof of their innocence from the accuser. They shouldn't have ever had to have done that. These people walked with them. They knew them. They had had face-to-face communication with them. They knew their integrity. But the first thing a person wants to do is try to figure out what you're really after. What are you trying to get from me? What does this message really mean? What did you really mean when you sent it? Korach says, I know what you're really doing. It's greed. And we'll never know what might have taken place at that meeting had it occurred. Had the meeting occurred, had they been able to talk through the suspicions, the fears, the states of mind, and so forth, maybe it could have been resolved. Maybe it couldn't. Maybe they had passed the point of no return. But what was the real heart of the issue that could have come out had they sat down face to face? Did these rebels feel as though they weren't getting enough respect? Did they feel as though their important positions in the camp were being pushed aside because the Levites and the Kohanim, that they now had a special position within the camp? Did they feel like they were just being shunted aside and disrespected in that way? Did they feel as though their voices and their opinions weren't valued or wanted or needed? That's usually how it starts. You don't care for me. You don't value me. You don't respect me. And then did that fear of being displaced or devalued, did that then grow into something we call envy? Did they come to envy the position of the Levites and the position of the Kohanim, the position of Moshe and Aharon, because they did not bring those thoughts captive? And did that envy then finally grow into rebellion? Because they've had all these bad thoughts going on for some time, and it finally came to the point that said, we go no further. We're going back this way. You are not the interpreter of God's word to us. You are not his messenger. That rebellion resulted in separation and death just because they could not communicate heart to heart. And if we look at the ancient example of Cain and Havel, Cain and Abel, we see the same thing. We see that Cain did not feel as though Adonai respected his offering. He knew he was wrong. but he wasn't getting respect. He didn't feel valued. And he looks over here at his brother, who is getting the respect, who is being valued. And he covets that respect and that value. But instead of saying, because the Lord told him, says, you know what to do. Sin crouches at the door. You know what to do. Fix it and come before me again with the right offering, with the right heart. Not just the right physical offering. There was nothing wrong with that. It was his heart that made it wrong. He said, go fix your heart and then bring me the best of what you have. Like your brother, Havel. He brought me the best of what he had. You bring me the best. But instead of going back and repenting and fixing the offering and doing what he should have done, he looks over at his brother and he thinks, look at him. He gets the respect. They don't like me. Mom and Dad don't like me. God doesn't like me. Nobody ever likes what I do. They always find fault with it. Does this sound like your children? Why do you think they call them the children of Israel? When we don't want to obey Adonai's clear instructions, what we start doing is blaming other people. And what we start trying to do is tear down their offerings, to tear them down. We begin to compare ourselves to other people rather than do what we know to do and take care of ourselves and don't worry about what Havel's doing over here with his offering. We start looking at him and the respect that he's getting. And instead of fixing me, he got fixed. He fixed his brother all right. He got rid of him. But had Cain been an effective communicator, that is, had he taken the information he already knew, because Adonai said, you know what to do. It's not like you're ignorant. I've sent you the message and you've understood it clearly. Now go back and do what I told you to do. Had he taken that information, humbly applied it to his own life instead of being distracted by his brother's offering, he could have very easily corrected himself and then come back with the proper first fruits and demonstrated to Adonai that he understood the message by his actions. That's how we demonstrate to Adonai we understand the message. It's through our actions. He understood. If you want to communicate with Adonai, you have to do that by demonstrating it through your actions. Not by saying, I believe, because the devils believe. You demonstrate that you have received the message, you've decoded that message, you understand that message and how it's supposed to work in your life, and then you say, okay, then I'll do it. I will demonstrate to you that this cycle is complete. And when I act, that's when that circle completes itself back to the origin. Because when the Father looks down and he sees you being obedient, he says they understood the message because now it's come back to me properly. It's not distorted. It hasn't gone through that carnal mind that Lola saw. It's come through a renewed mind. That's called faith. When you communicate back to Adonai that you understand by doing properly, we call that faith. Worship offerings are an act of communication back to Adonai that you understand the message. And you're communicating that back to him through your worship offerings. In obedience, it comes from the heart. If it doesn't come from the heart, then you're in the same situation as Cain is. You will become distracted and you'll start watching what other people are doing instead of fixing this first, going back, trying to understand the message, decoding that message, saying this is what it means, this is proper interpretation, this is how I'm supposed to act on it, then I go do it, then I've communicated and my worship and my service will be accepted. If it feels as though worship is a one-way street, and sometimes it does, if it feels like it's a one-way street, that circle is not being closed up, then we have either failed to understand the message, we just don't get it yet, or we've understood it and we've said, I'm not going to do it. Instead, I'll start.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
If he's not reaching us, who stepped out of the circle? We did. We either rejected the message and said, no, I won't, or we took the message in and we had a carnal mind and we filtered it through that and we just didn't get it. We didn't have the faith to process it and act on it. Then we become discouraged. Then we start blaming other people for our problems because we feel isolated now. We don't feel respected by God or anyone else. What am I doing here? We need to work hard to restore our own communication with Adonai instead of watching how other people do it and criticizing and observing. And this is what happened to Korach and his rebels. This is what happened to Cain. They became critical observers instead of faithful participators. And you didn't even know what I was going to say, and you read that thing. I thought, man, there's a moment. We can't be critical observers. We have to be faithful participators. The Torah is Adonai's communication to us. His word is his attempt to communicate. And he made it very easy. He even let us find it in English. Name your language. You can find the message. It's not a matter of you've got to go up into heaven to find the message or descend down to hell and find the message. It's near you. It's in the mouths of the messengers around you. He's put it near you, even in your mouth. But if you want to participate in that communication, if you want it to be more than a dead letter to you, you're going to have to receive it into you either through the written word or through a messenger. And I'm sorry to tell you, sometimes he uses messengers you don't like. You just don't hit it off with them. You think their motivations are all bad. You do have to be discerning. But he never promised you would like every messenger he sent you. They didn't like Moshe. For whatever reason, we don't know. Was it just jealousy or just a conflict of personality? What was it? I don't know. We weren't called to just like everyone. We were called to love them. And if they are the messenger, to accept the message. So we participate in the communication. We receive it either through reading the written word or through the messenger that's going to speak that word to us. Then we must understand it. We must decode, what does it really mean? He sent Moshe to help them decode that message. This is how he wants us to do this commandment. You have to accept that, understand it, decode it, and finally you have to demonstrate back to Adonai that you understood it by acting upon it obediently through proper action. And Scripture defines that as mixing in obedience and faith. And that's why I wanted that one verse read 7 times. If you don't mix it with obedience and faith, it will profit you nothing. You have to close that circle of communication by demonstrating in a physical way you understood the message. And if we reject it, that's when we move into rebellion. It's something different if you didn't understand. There's consequences, but if you didn't understand, it's different than if you just say, I understand it, but I will not do it. And instead of just saying, God, how dare you tell me what to do, who do we turn on? The messenger. They didn't shake their fists in God's face and say, how dare you set these people over us? How dare you supplant our position with this people? They shook their fist in Moses' face and said, how dare you act like a prince over us? It's much easier to do that than that. Who wants to do that? But it's real easy to do it to one another. How many times has a trusted friend given you good information meant to guide you back onto the right path and you just turned on them and devoured them? Their intention was to communicate God's will to you, but you tore them to pieces. The mailman knows what it's like to get turned on. It may not be the people in the house that want to bite him, but the dog always does. All right? We can't set our dogs on the messenger. He's just delivering the message. We have to receive the message and then begin the decoding process, the understanding process. But we're so stupid, we think that if we can distract God from the message he sent us and start pointing our fingers at what other people are doing wrong, then we're exempt from being obedient. What do little kids do? If you reprimand one of your children, does he say, okay, Mommy, I won't do it again? Instead, he starts tattling on everything the other kids have done. Or he'll say, yeah, but Mommy, you know what you did last week? I heard you say a bad word last week. They're going to tell on you. They're going to try to divert your attention from the real issue, which is, you misobeyed me. I did not misobey. Yes, you did. Yeah, but Johnny did worse than this. Don't let your attention be diverted by your children, because certainly your Father in heaven is not going to be diverted if you start tattling on the people that you know. You be responsible for you. When we do this, often we will distort the explanation of the word, which is what Korach chose. He said, we'll just interpret this differently. That way we don't have to accept your leadership. Another thing that we start to do is to compare ourselves to other people. That goes back to, yeah, but you know what they did? Another thing is that we refuse to let the message be clarified. We refuse to come and sit at the table and talk it through. These men said, we will not go up. You're not going to change our minds. You're not going to tell us that we've misinterpreted what happened here. We become skeptical, we become rude, we become sarcastic, or we give the silent treatment. That's how we respond when we don't want to do what we know we're supposed to do. And it's not only our communication with Adonai that has to be complete and mixed with faith in order for our relationships to profit. You're going to have to do that with the relationships and the people that you have around you. You're going to have to mix faith with those too. It's not just mixing it with faith toward God's Word. When a person that walks with you gives you a message, you are going to have to mix it with faith in order to act properly. Faith and hope are twins. If you have hope for the future of the relationship, then you will mix faith with the message that you heard from that person. And that's just as simple as closing up the cycle and the circle of communication. It means that we believe the best about the person, we hope the best about the person, not the worst. We don't automatically begin attributing their motives to be evil or greedy or power hungry or controlling or whatever we think they're after. We don't just automatically start pinning that on them when we receive the message we don't like. Instead, we wait. We're patient. We try to communicate. We do our best to understand, even if that means meeting with them face to face as many times as necessary to really understand what was in their heart, or maybe what they were afraid of when they sent the message. And then we have to act upon that message in an attitude of hope and faith. When did Cain and Havel move from brotherhood to competitors for God's respect? When did that happen? And if you look at conflict, often we don't know when we move from being partners with someone to being competitors. It takes on a life all its own. You know, it's usually one party that will start experiencing doubt about the relationship, but they won't tell the other one. And all of a sudden, you start hearing all this resentment and stuff coming out. I'm sure this caught Moshe off guard. He said, where'd all this come from? I didn't know you had all this in your heart against me. But they didn't just come up with it that day. It had been happening long before, probably ever since they left Egypt. You know, there's some people that live for the good times, and they would get down probably, and they would have a great miracle or whatever, and it'd bring them right back up. But let us pass over the miracle, we drop right back down. But there came a point where that was no longer acceptable. And all this resentment started to come out. They will not communicate that resentment to you typically when they first begin to experience it. They'll wait until it's almost to the point of no return. When they resent you so much they can hardly stand you. And you know, sometimes I felt that way too. I felt like I was on the last lap of a tight race, running neck and neck with somebody, and I just thought this was a person that was walking with me. I just thought we were having a walk. And all of a sudden, the person starts going faster and faster and faster, and you're trying to keep up, and what's going on? And before you know it, you're at a dead run in a race, and you never heard the gun go off, and you did not was a race. You thought it was a walk around the block. But it turned into a competition. What should have been a partnership became a competition. And I believe that Moshe felt the same way. He thought these were his partners in this journey. And all of a sudden he realizes that they are competitors. That's a horrible feeling to realize that's where you are. And it started way back there and you didn't know it. You feel really stupid when that happens. Moshe, I think, felt the same. They were almost in a competition for Adonai's favor, but this was only in the minds of the rebels. Adonai never asked us to compete for his favor with one another. That's not the way that he operates. You as a father don't operate that way. If you do, you're wrong. Your children shouldn't have to compete for your favor and try to outdo one another for your kind words and rewards and so forth. They're different children, but you love them the same. Their roles in your life are different, but you love them the same. It's not a competition, but it is part of our fallen nature. If you look back at Cain and Havel, at the competition that was there, when did Korach and the others move from being partners in acts of faith to competitors? I think it's when they rejected the authority of God's word and the messenger. I think that's the point. I don't think it was really aimed at Moshe. He just happened to be the one in the position. But I don't think it was that personal, although it's easy to take it that way. When someone starts accusing you of bad motives, you're going to take it personal. You're human. But it's really not at you, it's aimed. It's aimed up. Realize that. It's aimed up. The rebellion is not really against you. It's against the authority of Adonai and his word in their lives. And it's just easier to attack a fallible human being because there's not one person in here that's perfect, and I have yet to meet the perfect human being. Until we see Yeshua face to face, we won't. So it's sure easier to point a finger at a person and say, you're not perfect, why should I follow you? It's still rebellion. And when they accuse you, when you start to hear that suspicion against your motivation, it's really just an accusation against their own imperfection. They don't want to repent and repair their offering. They want to destroy yours. They don't want to fix theirs, they want to destroy yours. So our miscommunication, both receiving it, giving communication, understanding communication, acting on communication, it's rooted in the oldest rebellion on earth. I mean, did God really say, did he really communicate for us not to eat that fruit? Is that really what he was communicating to us? Or did we interpret that wrong? Or did he just say, don't touch it? Is that really what he said? What was he trying to say? Don't touch it, don't eat it. Let's really think about that. Let's take a vote. What do you think God meant by this? Don't touch it, don't eat it. You're not going to die. Did he mean he would love us? A loving God would never kill anybody. He would not allow us to die. What did you understand the commandment to mean? Given time, you probably distorted it. If you had already made up your mind to do evil, if you had already made up your mind to be disobedient, you did not understand, decode, and then act on the communication properly. You did not receive it the way that he intended it. You did not act upon it in the way that he intended you to act upon it. Or did you mistrust his motives in telling you not to do it? Well, he would have given me more information if he expected me to keep that commandment. There's no reasoning behind that. I don't have enough basis to act on this. I've got to understand why I'm supposed to or not supposed to do this thing. You start letting that carnal mind work and distort and warp the communication. Well, he put me in charge of the garden. Shouldn't I be the one to make up my mind what fruit I eat? And he put me in charge, right? It's my privilege to eat whatever I want because I'm his representative on earth. I can do anything I want. And he will rubber stamp it for me. We've got a lot of people running around thinking that certain decisions from certain institutions have the authority of Almighty God, and if they decide to change his word, he's going to say, okay, go ahead, you're my representative on earth. That never has been true. It never will be true. We do not have the authority to change his commandments and say, because he put me in charge, I can reinterpret this the way I want it. Repair your own offering instead of looking at other people's offering. Obey it, even if you don't understand it. Even if you don't have enough information to really put a motive or a reason behind it. Wait until the cool of the evening, until you can talk with him. Walk with him as a partner. It's worth waiting until the cool of the evening, till you can have a face-to-face communication, rather than acting on how your carnal mind wants to interpret it. Same thing with our relationships with one another.
What we've got here is
We have to communicate. It's worth waiting. It's worth more than emails and telephone calls. It's worth more than just watching someone on a TV and interpreting it any way we want to. It's worth going to a local congregation, mixing with the people, communicating with them, getting to know the minister, getting to know how he walks, and getting that face-to-face communication in the cool of the evening rather than acting in the heat of the day. And that's wisdom that's worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. Wait until the cool of the evening. Don't act in the heat of the day. Talk, communicate. It is rooted in the oldest rebellion on earth. So easily did Adam and Eve allow the circle of communication to be broken by just not waiting and being patient until they could ask him in person, what did you really mean? Could you tell us more about this? Because I guarantee you, if they had asked more, he would have given more. He would have helped them put more meaning to it. But so easily do we fail to communicate with Adonai. And so readily do we fail to communicate with one another. It's not worth waiting and finding out what they really meant. We just want to assume what the message meant. And that's why television and internet media are not a solution to communication problems. In fact, they have done wonderful things to spread the good news of Messiah. There's people being reached in places that could never be reached before, but I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here to talk about failure. And that's what happened with Korach and his men. They failed to communicate. You know, even with all these wonderful contributions, we have to remember that it's only good for passing along information. You can get information through the internet. You can receive information through a television, but you cannot communicate with those people. The very fact that it is a medium means it goes in between. It has separated you from the source. You are not going to know completely and without error what the person intended until you can be with them face to face. They give you information, but not communication. They facilitate knowledge. But on the other hand, they encourage isolationism. There are people who sit happily with the computer all the time and never leave the house. And they facilitate misunderstanding because of what you're filtering that through. Remember the boy up in Minnesota on the Indian reservation that just went into school and shot a bunch of his friends in school? This is what Fox News wrote about that shooting spree. It says, if Weiss was quiet in school, he became an extrovert in cyberspace. It appeared he may have posted messages on a neo-Nazi website expressing admiration for Hitler and calling himself Todesengel, German for the angel of death. In one posting, he criticized interracial mixing on the reservation and slammed fellow Indian teens for listening to rap music. We have kids my age killing each other over things as simple as a fight, and it's because of rap influence, he wrote. Weiss's Hotmail address links him to frequent postings on one internet forum called Rise of the Dead, a site where contributors collaborate on stories about average people attempting to survive in a zombie-infested world. Now, how did his actions not communicate so well what he thought himself to be? He was not communicating on the internet. That's not what he was doing. He was inventing himself. He was inventing a facade to a faceless group of people. Had he met a concentration camp survivor, he would have been as meek as a lamb. All that neo-Nazi crap would have been crap. He would have been as meek as a lamb had he met an old woman with a tattoo on her arm, and he would have melted face to face. But on a website, what did he become? How did he invent himself? He was a killer, and this is the very thing he criticized other people for on the internet. Rather than survive in a graceless world, as these stories that he wrote, what did he do? Not only did he commit the most graceless act of all, killing other human beings, he didn't survive. He died. Separation and death. Emails and television images do not convey to us who a person really is or what they really mean. They are not capable of completing a cycle of communication, sending, receiving by understanding, and acting consistently and faithfully with what we understand. And in this movement, we rely heavily on the internet for information. That's part of the age. But often, it's the desire for knowledge that leads us to a problem. We go everywhere and we get knowledge from everywhere. But what do we know about knowledge? It puffs up. It makes us proud because we know more. It puffed up Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve, so that they forfeited a godly relationship in order to acquire knowledge. How many of us are forfeiting relationship just to sit in front of a television or a computer and acquire more knowledge than other people? The television and the internet have become the greatest sources of information in history, but they are also contributing to the most proud, ungrateful people in human history. We have it all, and we're not grateful. Because we can always look on television or the internet and see what we don't have. Instead of being grateful for what we do have, these media remind us that these famous people live this way, and we ought to be able to expect to live that way. We are a very proud generation in human history. We know things that nobody else knew in their generation, but we do not communicate. We don't communicate with Adonai, and we don't communicate with one another, because what you know will never help you communicate. It's just knowledge. Some Christians are TV ministry addicts. I know, because my mom was one. She was addicted to Christian television. She'd get a little dose of comedy from this minister. She'd get a big old helping of feel good from that minister. And then she would go over on this channel, and this one would just breathe out hellfire and damnation. She could whip herself up a little bit. You can hit the whole range of emotions with television ministry. But did she learn to communicate with people? Did she learn to function effectively in a congregation? Not in 64 years did she learn that. And television was something that kept her from it. She could sit in front of her television and worship God. And she didn't have to deal with the problems in a congregation. That's what we're called to do. To endure the tests in the wilderness. You're never going to be insulted. You're never going to have to forgive. No one's ever going to overlook you or disrespect you if you're just turning on the television. You don't have to deal with it. But that's what you're called to deal with. That's part of the walk. Maybe they left that out of the salvation message. I'm sorry. Now I'm telling you. That's what you're called into if you're a disciple. A disciple is someone that doesn't just believe, they act on what they believe. And they're active in that walk. You see that teen that murdered everybody? He could spout out any number of good or bad doctrines, whatever he picked up on the internet. But was he able to communicate people and tell them the pain in his heart to the point where somebody could have stopped him? No. There was no communication. He didn't even know what he believed anymore. All he knew was that everybody else was wrong and inferior. That's where you will go alone if you isolate yourself. Some internet Messianics, we don't want to leave them out, are notoriously ungrateful people. They'll cruise the websites looking for opportunities to catch a teacher in an error or a mistake or a misspeak. I've said some crazy stuff before because my brain thought one thing and my mouth said another thing. But they'll cruise around and they'll nitpick and they'll go to all these websites and try to find something wrong and then send them an email like, aha, I caught you. You made a mistake. This is wrong. You need to fix this. But they might prove they have more knowledge in that area, but how do they function in a congregation? That's what I want to know. I want to see them function over a period of time in a congregation where the tests really are. The internet will not test you. The only thing that will test you is when your computer crashes. Okay? Other than that, there's not much challenge. But these people, they're puffed up in knowledge. They know a lot, but they are not prepared to function in a community of believers. They can't commit to a fellowship long term. If they do drift through a fellowship, they're going to be constantly reproving and rebuking you and trying to get you back on the right path. And if they hear a sermon, they're not going to apply it to them. They're going to apply it to everybody else they think it applies to. That's how they operate, because their eyes are on their brother's offerings, not on their own. Can you see that? They're watching you because they don't want to look at what's wrong with themselves. They're busybodies. They go from house to house. The internet is the medium. How do they miss it? Because they're not getting that prolonged face-to-face relationship that a local congregation offers. They don't have experience in resolving conflicts, and that is your maturing in your walk with Messiah. It's how you resolve. But you cannot practice things like humility and isolation from fellowship. How are you going to be humble before a computer? Tell me how you do that. I don't know. How can you forgive a computer? Well, I guess we have to even try to go back and start over this thing that we tried to do. Maybe that's not forgiveness. Maybe that's just persistence to obtain what we want from the computer. But if we're going to become raving fans of television ministries or raving fans of internet personalities, all you're going to know is what they choose to portray to you. It's carefully packaged. Even what we send out over the internet, it's a very small portion of our service. They don't see us act out. You know, we got the full range, in case you're thinking we're wonderful. But we fight and get over it. That's what having a congregation is for. It gives you experience in resolving conflicts in a positive way. You don't know when you watch someone on the internet or the television if that minister is beating his wife, if he cussed out the grocery store clerk the day before. You don't know if they pay their bills. You don't know anything about them unless you've walked with them in person. You don't even know if they're squandering the ministry finances if they won't disclose. Some of them choose not to disclose. All you can know and truly evaluate are the people that you spend time with, face to face. You know what? You're rarely going to be called upon to exercise virtual virtues, because there really is no such a thing. You must learn to forgive. You must learn to be humble. You must learn to be grateful, and you must do it in the company of real people, not things that you can unplug, not things that you control. So you come in here, you can't control people. You can't control what they say. You can't control what they do. And when you get sick of it, the only plug that's available is the door right there. That's how you cut them off. But you're going to mature by sticking with it, face to face. If there really is such a thing as a virtual virtue, then remember this. When you communicate with someone by phone or by email, remember the person on the other end is a human being. It's not a machine. It's a human being. And they have feelings the same way that you do. Especially if this person's a co-laborer in Messiah Yeshua. Don't make assumptions about the person on the other end or their motives until you've talked to them face to face, until you've completed that circle of communication. Don't elevate the person above their position, but don't try to tear them down either. Balance. And one of the saddest things, which if you're familiar with internet lingo, flame wars. If you don't know what flame wars is, it's an episode of escalating rude email and web postings. It's a tongue of fire. It's that world of iniquity. And it adds injury to insult. This person will not like what this person says. They send everybody on their news group an email. And then this person realizes what this person has sent out, and in order to defend their position, they're going to send emails out to their group. And then this person feels like he must respond because he can't let that stand, and he sends out a whole nother round of emails. And it gets higher and higher and higher and higher. They're disrespecting you. If you're on that news group or you're getting those emails and you're getting that kind of communication, they're disrespecting you. They're disrespecting your time, your attention, and your resources. Because most of the time you're going to that website because there's information that you need or that you want or that you need to evaluate, and they are wasting your time by forcing you to watch their flame war. They are disrespecting you as much as one another. It's very hard for human beings psychologically to be accused and walk away and just let it stand. But you know what? That's the best thing you can do. When you see something like this occurring, or if you were to ever be involved in one, the best thing you can do is once you send out the information and you know that the information's accurate, if the person doesn't want to receive it, sit down with them face to face. If it means getting on a plane, going to their town and knocking on their door and talking to them face to face, let that be your communication. Don't start sending these hot emails out to everybody you know just to prove your position and then there was nothing wrong with what you did. It's very self-righteous. They're trying to build up their own self-esteem at your expense when they send you that garbage. It's garbage. They're sending you those tongues of fire. Remember, it's set on fire of hell. That's where that comes from. It comes from hell. It takes special grace from the Holy Spirit for us to just take it and walk away from it. Just leave it be until we can talk to the person. And you know what? There's an element of people out there that like that. They thrive on watching people throw accusations at one another through email or through the news networks. They'll do that. They'll interview this family, then they'll run go tell this family what that one said, and then they'll run go tell that. That's a medium. I think that's where we get the spiritual witchcraft thing. A medium. It's something that jumps in between, but it distorts it, and it fuels it, and it escalates it. It kind of reminds me, you know, as we watch ministries get involved in flame wars, there was a certain man, and I won't tell you the name of the speaker, but he really enjoyed this motivational speaker, and he went to hear him speak. And he heard, you know, the speeches and was just overjoyed because he felt like this man had the answer to his problems, that this man really had a lot of care and compassion for people to be able to have that kind of insight. And lo and behold, the speaker asked him to go eat lunch with him afterward. And he was just thought, this is the greatest thing in the world. This wonderful, wise person, this compassionate person's asked me to go out to eat. Well, it turns out that there was something wrong with the food at the meal, and the speaker ended up cussing out the waiter. And the man was totally disillusioned because the way he thought the person was and the way he portrayed himself to the masses was not the way that he interacted with somebody working for tips. You can be disillusioned with people that speak to you and minister to you through the television and through the internet. You know, having these gladiators online does not enable peaceful resolution. It retards it. And what you need to do is, if you end up the best thing you can do is send them an email and say, take me off your list until you guys sit down face to face and resolve this. You may never see eye to eye, but until you can walk peaceably with one another and leave the rest of the world out of your conflicts, take me off your list. When it's resolved, put me back on. That will put pressure on them to stop this, because you're watching something obscene when you read those things. You're letting yourself be drawn into it. And you're like that man that went to lunch and he realized, oh my gosh, he's not who I thought he was. Don't let them do that to you. Face to face puts the respect in the relationship. The other person becomes human, but the internet will hinder forgiveness, humility, gratefulness, all those things. It will only help you communicate information. It will not help you communicate, because the message must be understood as the sender intended for you to understand it. And when you send the message, take the responsibility, if it's an important thing, to find out if the person really understood what you said and what you intended. They might have heard what you said, but that's not the way they filtered it. With children, you can say, what did I just say? And you can make them tell you back what you said, and you will know immediately if they understood it. You have to be more tactful with adults. A lot of times when I'm communicating at work, I have to ask an inmate, now what did you hear me say? Let me make sure that I communicated that properly. I put it back on me. I'll take the responsibility. If you didn't understand it, it was my fault. But tell me what you understood, and I can correct myself. Don't say, you didn't understand. You're not getting it. You're dumb. You know. Don't do that. Take the responsibility for making sure they understand what you intended. If you do that, then you can close up that circle. Make sure that they understand. And a lot of times, and I've probably done it to most of you at one time or another, you'll tell me something, and I'll be a little distracted when you started it. And when you get done, I'll say that again, but say it slower. Well, I know you think I'm probably retarded, and in a sense I am, because I didn't process it the first time. I wasn't sure that what I was taking from it was what you intended. If I can get you to slow down, then I can ask you a question. If there's a part I didn't understand, or if there's a part that I didn't pick up, I will hear it the second time. Don't be afraid to do that to one another. If it flies by you, stop the person and say that again. Is this what you meant? Is this what you intended? Did I hear you to say this? And you learn this your first semester in college. I hated that class. Why do I have to take communication? I already know how to talk. Well, we don't. That's why we had a rebellion. People didn't know how to talk to one another. They didn't know how to communicate. If you will take one extra minute to clarify something, it's a major reflection on your attitude. If you will take the time to make sure someone understands, you are cultivating a relationship. It's like being on a relay team. Remember in track? You had this little baton, and you had 4 people, and you had to run around and pass that baton off to the next person. Well, information is like that baton. Some people, all they want to do is sprint alone and get a gold medal. You have to be a team player to be on the relay team. If you want to be trusted to pass on information, you have to be a team player. Otherwise, people can't trust you. It might be that you take off And you never even let them get close to you with that information. How can they ever pass off the information if you're running away from them? Some people just don't want to talk about it. Because if they understand it, then they might have to act on it. Other people, they'll slap it in your hand very carelessly. And you take off, but you really didn't have it. You're running, but the information's way back there rolling on the track. They let go before you had it, and you took off before you had a firm grip on it. With information, we have to keep a firm grip. You run with them as long as it's necessary for you to feel that firm grip tugging back on you. When you feel them tugging back, you know they have it. Then you can let go, because they understood what you meant. Or if you're running and you don't have a firm grip on it, you just think you understand, but there's a little bit of doubt, or you know you're starting to attribute bad motives to people, or you know you're starting to watch the other team run, and you shouldn't be. You should be focused on the track you're running on. You keep holding on. You let your grip get tighter and tighter. You make that person run with you till you've got it. That way, we won't drop the ball. We won't drop the baton. Here's some basic rules of internet etiquette. And I never thought I would be reading something like this in a message, but it's absolutely applicable to the Messianic movement. Number one, when you're communicating or attempting the communication, I don't believe it's really communication. I think it's just passing information. But if you want to call it that, remember the human being. Imagine that person sitting at the table with you. You'll treat them much better if you imagine them sitting at the table with you. Adhere to the same standards online that you follow in real life. If you don't steal books or music CDs in real life, if you're not on Brookhaven's most wanted list, then don't steal books and CDs and copyrighted information off the internet. If you want something, ask before you take it. Most of the time, they'll give it to you. Ask before you take. Respect other people's time and their bandwidth. Don't forward everything somebody sends to you. Don't do that. Read the instructions carefully. A lot of the problems that IsraelNet has is because people don't read the instructions carefully. They scan them. And then they don't know how to log in. They don't know how long it takes to get a password. It's because they weren't careful with the information. Help keep the flame wars under control. Don't get drawn on to those online conflicts. If someone's got your email address in it, email them and say, take me out till this is over. Respect other people's privacy. Ask before you post things written in private correspondence. Don't abuse your power. If you wouldn't be sarcastic, critical, rude, and accusatory to your family and friends, don't hide behind a computer and practice it. There's no excuse for poor manners or rudeness, especially to a brother in Messiah Yeshua. Be forgiving of people's mistakes. We all make mistakes. And when we do it on the internet, it's in a real public way. Forgive. Get over it. Virtual spiritual communities will not train you to exercise the virtues of the Torah. And just remember, you didn't throw your child into the flames of hell the first 100 times that he willfully disobeyed you. Don't throw brothers and sisters into the flames of hell the first 100 times they fall into disobedience. If you're interacting with people strictly through media, intermediaries, and go-betweens, you are a prime candidate for TV Christianity and .com Messianism, because you've isolated yourself. There's no pain in media spirituality. There's no pain there. You can unplug it, you can turn it on, you can turn it off. And it's exasperating sometimes to cooperate in worship. I mean, if you look back at the original example of Cain and Abel, you only have 2 people in a worship service. And somebody died. What happens when we've got 30 or 100 people all trying to worship together? A lot can go wrong when we fail.
What we've got here is failure to communicate.
We've got to be able to worship together and to communicate effectively. If we're not communicating, then chances are somebody's going to start feeling disrespected, devalued, overlooked, inferior, when it's not that way at all. It's just some things out of place that we need to try to put back into place. If Adonai fails to turn his face toward someone's offering, toward their worship, there's not much we can do about it. There wasn't much that Abel could do about Cain's offering. Maybe he could have communicated with him and shown him the correct way, told him that it was a heart issue more than a physical issue. Who knows what could have happened had those two brothers been able to talk instead of fight. But we need to look at people not as competitors, but as partners. It's one thing if Adonai won't respect their offering. It might be that we can help repair the breach in the communication and show them where it broke down and guide them back. But what if it's us that failed to respect their offering? They brought a heartfelt offering, and we didn't respect it. We didn't value it. We have to examine ourselves to see how we are receiving one another's offerings. But it has to be done sometimes. If there's conflict in the cool of the evening, don't act and don't speak in the heat of the day. Give it time. Talk to the Father face to face in the cool of the evening when you cool off. When the situation cools off, talk to the Father. What did this mean? What was I supposed to learn from this? What did you really say? I know the serpent's over here putting doubt in my mind, and now I don't even know what you said. I'm confused now. Tell me what you really meant. Or if it's a person, walk with them in the cool of the evening and say, I'm confused now. I thought you meant this. But maybe that's not what you intended. Tell me what you really meant. Explain to me in a cool, not hot way, so that we can walk together, so that this garden has a future, so that we will be populated in the future instead of driven out of the garden. Because misunderstanding, miscommunication, we do have a responsibility to complete it, not only with the Father above, but with one another. Because one another is who we're going to take it out on. If we will do this, if we will take responsibility to communicate with one another, I can guarantee you that Adonai will respect our offerings. Because as a father, that's what he's waiting to see. Your children, when you had, brothers and sisters, and you knew that they were fighting, what did it do to your heart to sit back and watch them resolve it on their own? To come to an understanding and apply the Word of God to their lives that you had taught them? Didn't it make you feel good to see them resolve it? That's what he's waiting for. He's waiting to see us complete with one another a cycle of communication. So try to understand the information you get. If you don't understand it, take as long as necessary to understand it the way the person intended it, without just saying they meant this by it. If you don't ask them what they meant, you will never know. You will only be able to pin on it what you think they meant. Do we demonstrate our understanding of what someone tells us by acting in good faith? They might give us the information, but if we ignore it, or we overdo it, or we distort it through the carnal mind, then we will not act faithfully. We have to act on that message with faith. We have to mix that in there. Don't let go of communication until it's complete. Hang on. Make sure that transfer is complete. Keep it plugged in. Make sure that our communication doesn't go from partnership into just a battle of wills and the last word. We have to be forgiving and willing to try again when we fail. We can't be like Korach, because the difference between us and Korach is we're willing to pick it up and try again. There's no other choice in Yeshua. We pick it up, we pick the baton up, dust it off, and we start over. And this time we have more information, we have experience, and we'll do better on the next race. With Korach, there was no second race. There was no second chance. He gathered up the troops and he sent the message back. You're going to tell me what I didn't, I don't see what I'm seeing? You're going to tell me I took it wrong? I didn't take it wrong. We didn't take it wrong. He's going to gather up troops. He's going to gather people in who'll see it his way. Make him feel better. And he's going to say, not only that, our wives and our family, they're going to stick with us. We will not sit down and communicate. We will not come up. We prefer separation and death to communication. We only want people around us that will respect us and give us the proper respect and honor we deserve in this camp. You know what? It's a really good thing that Korach didn't have his own website or email group, or it would have been a whole lot worse than it was. Because I think what they had then and what we have now is a failure to communicate.